Hello. Today we will dive into the history of board games. Board games have become more popular than ever thanks to various modern technological advancements, from the ability to fund independent game ideas to the inclusion of taps and online interactions in gameplay. On top of being fun, playing tabletop games has some health benefits. They are a good exercise for the brain, and while they can get quite tense, they actually decrease stress. But how did they come to be, and what is the actual board game history? Um, let's go a couple thousands of years back in time, and it may seem hard to believe, but humans were playing dice, or at least a prehistoric version of them before the first records of writing. The Basher Hoyuk burial, 5,000-year-old mound in southeast Turkey, gives us the oldest insight into the history of board games. When the site was discovered, archaeologists found nearly 50 small carved painted stones, considered the pieces of the oldest board game known to humanity. Similar discoveries have been made in regions around the Nile, suggesting that the origin of the oldest board games begins somewhere in the Middle East. The original dice were made from wood, stones, and even carved knuckle bones. Some games involved painted sticks that would be flipped similarly to how we use dice. So it's safe to say that the concept behind dice games is where it all began. As time passed, the dice materials became more refined and even extravagant. The six-sided dice we are familiar with began in Roman times and were made of glass, marble, or ivory. Around 3000 BC, board games began to take on a spiritual element in players' eyes. This started with the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, who played a game called Senet, the oldest board game known today. It was a board game played with counters and throw sticks that featured 3 rows of Ken squares and a range of figures or pawns. The game was used by the rich because it was discovered in the ancient tombs of Egypt and depicted in the drawings. At the same time, the actual rules of gameplay are still unclear. The ancient Egyptians believed that the gods, Ra, Thos, and Osiris, protected those who would win the game. Modern versions of Senet are available with assumed rules. Another board game from around the same period with a spiritual connection is Mayhem. And once again, the rules of the game are unclear, but the board itself is based around the god Mehen, a giant serpent who wrapped itself around a god of Sun Ra. Thanks to an Arab game called Hyena, very similar to Mehen, we have come close to understanding Mehen. In Hyena, players have 6 marbles and 1 lion figure. Using stick dice, players move along the outer edge of the board towards the center in a race. Once a player hits the center, they reverse their direction of play and head back to the start. Once they get there, a lion piece is activated to capture the opponent's marble pieces, almost like an early Pac-Man. Dating back to 2000 DC, the oldest game known to us that is still being played is the royal game of Ur. The game's rules were found carved into an ancient stone tablet. Or is played with 2 sets of pieces, 1 black and 1 white. And the game features 7 markers and 3 tetrahedral dice. This 2-player strategy race board game is equal parts strategy and luck. It was first played in ancient Mesopotamia and had spiritual significance, as it was believed to reflect a player's future. And the game of Ur eventually evolved into what we know today as Backgammon. An alternative history of backgammon originated in ancient Persia around 5000 BC, but the lack of evidence makes it difficult to confirm. However, we do know that backgammon became a big hit in the mid-1960s. Popularized by Prince Alexis Obolenski, who held the title the father of modern backgammon, the official rules for the game that we use today were established after Prince Obolenski created the International Backgammon Association and the World Backgammon Club of Manhattan. It was here that the first backgammon tournament would take place in 1963. Moving to 1300 BC, a strategy game called Ludus Latrunculorum was widely played throughout the Roman Empire. Similar to, but far more complicated than chess, the game resembled actual military tactics of the era. This is the first known insurgents military strategy in the gaming world. And then played on a checkerboard, the game's concept revolves around capturing your opponent's pieces by using two of your own to corner them. Many believe that Ludus Latrunculorum was further refined to a simpler version of what we know now as chess. Although the games appear to be using a similar board concept and pawn pieces, no solid proof exists, and some see both games as unrelated. Regarding the famous board games we know and play today, it may surprise you that Snakes and Ladders, aka Chutes and Ladders, have been around for centuries. A version of Snakes and Ladders is known to go back as far as 200 BC as an Indian kids game that teaches one about the difference between good and evil. Simply put, making your way up the ladders was good, being eaten by a snake and sliding back down was evil. When the British landed in India, the game spread like wildfire through Western culture and was eventually made mainstream in 1943 by US company Milton Bradley. Snakes and Ladders is one of the few board games from India that have made it to the current times and received global adoption. Now we enter the modern era on the road to chess. The history of chess is one of the most fascinating and one of the longest in making, partly because there are several known ancient board games similar to chess. History shows that around 400 AD, there was an ancient Germanic and Celtic family of games, one of which was a strategic game called Tafel. Tafel is still considered one of the most influential medieval board games. The checkered wooden game board had two opposing armies painted in different colors. The layout, size, and specific number of figures vary across cultures, but there's always a common denominator, one army being twice as big as the other, and the king piece. The game's objective was to help the king escape to board sides while being chased. It was initially thought that these games were created to mimic attacks from Vikings, which is why the attacking force was given the advantage. Further evidence suggests that Tafel was often found in places Vikings have often traveled to, and over time, Tafel could be found in most countries in Northern Europe. There is a strong historical correlation that Tafel has gone through iterations around 6th century AD, resulting in Chaturanga, an Indian strategy board game of the Gupta Empire. The game's name translates as 4 divisions and represents chariots, infantry, elephantry, and cavalry, which later become rook, pawn, bishop, and knight in modern chess. Chaturanga was eventually brought to Persia around 600 AD, where it was given a European makeover and then called chess. Muslim traders spread the game via European seaports into Western Europe and Russia. The rules were tweaked several times until 1475, when the first chess book was printed. The rules have solidified into the rules we know today and have not been changed since. Chess continues to be one of the most widely respected board games. Another game popularized in 18th century France was dominoes. While it is not precisely known where and when the game was invented, many historians agree that it was invented in China around 1100 AD. However, it wasn't until the 18th century before the game landed in Europe. Its popularity exploded when it was brought from Italy to France. The French even created a puzzle version of the game for which players had to place tiles over a pattern. Dominoes made its way over to Britain in the late 18th century and spread worldwide, finding particular popularity in Latin America. Checkers, also known as draughts, has some archaeological evidence that claims it was played as early as 3000 BC. At the same time, the board and pieces differ significantly from what we know the modern checkers to be. Unfortunately, no description of the rules has been found, hence the correlation is only hypothetical. However, an Egyptian game called Al-Kirki is very similar to the checkers we know today and can be traced as far back as 1400 BC, with the French deciding to place the game on a chessboard around 1100 AD. The game and the current rules eventually found their way to England and America, and in 1847, the first checkers world championship was played. It was also one of the first games to go digital. Right before World War II, when computers were in a rudimentary stage of development, a man named Alan Turing created a basic checkers game for the computer that required paper calculations to play. Another popular modern game with early beginnings is Backgammon, also known as Parcheesi, and others, which was the national game of India. The name in game centers around the number 25. The highest score you can get. The roots have been traced as far back as the 16th century, as it was played by the Indian Emperor Akbar I of the Mughal Empire. Go is another game where the origins aren't entirely known, but hypothesized it originated in China around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. At the same time, it could be one of the ancient Japanese board games played in the 17th century. It is known that since 1612, the shogun ran Go competitions and gave awards to the best Go players in the country. Despite its increasing popularity in Japan, Go didn't hit Europe until 1880, when Oscar Korschelt published a book about the game. It has since made a name for itself with a European championship established in 1957. Today, you can find a fair bit of discussion online about the game, as well as being able to play it with people all over the world. A Japanese version of chess called shogi also appeared in the 18th century. Confucian, created by a Japanese Confucian scholar, Ogyu Sarai. Shogi, which translates to broad chess, features a large board. Mahjong is believed to have roots well into 550 BC in Jiangsu, Anhui, and Chengdu provinces. The first historical record, however, dates back to the end of the 19th century. It is also known that the early 20th century saw a steep rise in the popularity of Mahjong, where it became more widely played than chess. Enter the modern era. RPGs are also known as the hugely popular evolution of the board game, the role-playing board game. The game that kicked this sub-scene into overdrive is a household name, Dungeons and Dragons, and several variations that followed. And Dungeons and Dragons was first published in 1974 with various genres of single player and multiplayer boards and computer games following. The main idea behind role-playing is that you and your friends sit around a table with pens, paper, and dice and embark on an imagined world of fantasy. Dungeons and Dragons involves characters such as elves, dwarves, and gnomes, along with a single dungeon master who runs the game and describes the world the players are delving into. And dices are used to determine the outcome in an open-ended game to make for a new adventure each time it's played. In the 70s and 80s, those who played the game were considered closet case geeks who spent their time creating maps in basements. It was even shunned by various Christian moralists who claimed players were dabbling in witchcraft. It was the popularity rose and fell, but a consistent cult following was always present. Later, in 2014, a 5th edition of the rules came out, and for some unexplained reason, popularity skyrocketed. Therapists even began using the game to get troubled kids to open up, and children with autism are encouraged to play D&D to develop social skills. It is also hugely popular with adults. Drew Barrymore and Vin Diesel claim they are regular players, and constant D&D nights are held as stress relief in Silicon Valley. Enter the card game explosion. The 90s and early 2000s have seen a rapid growth of card games, which have mainly been pioneered by first Magic the Gathering and later Dominion. And in 1991, a company called Wizards of the Coast set out to create a portable game that people could play online at conventions and on the go. This is when the first version of Magic the Gathering was born. It debuted in 1993 and quickly became one of the most popular board games of the decade. Later in 2002, Magic Online hit gaming consoles with players dueling AI opponents while interacting with physical cards. The classic deck builder game Dominion was released, following up on Magic's success. Influenced by Magic the Gathering, Dominion started as a 90-card fan-made extension for Magic that eventually developed into its own very popular universe. The future for board games is unimaginably bright. Considering board games today and how far they have come, it is a safe assumption that they will continue to integrate with technology and remain a firm staple in the entertainment spectrum. There are more board game cafes, shops, websites, and events than the industry has ever seen. And also, the current trend suggests that new board games are set to be released more often in the future, exploring what healthy competition in the market. All the right indicators are in place. The popularity of board games will grow strongly, and we will enter the golden age of board gaming. Thank you for joining Culture Eyes on this journey through the captivating history of board games. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.